Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically explain a lot of this article. I'm going to read all of it basically, and then we're going to go into the whole World War III thing, how the Hegelian dialectic principle has been played out throughout the first two world wars, and how it's playing out, and what I believe now is a collective mindset, not really an overall World War III as a physical war. I believe that's going to happen, but I believe World War III is basically happening within the mindset first, and then you're going to have the full-blown chaos. And then we're going to basically just go over some simple aspects of how this works, okay? So we can get a clear understanding of how this dialectic works, okay? So let's go ahead and just start reading this article. Okay, and what is the Hegelian dialectic? Introduction, why study Hegel? And it starts out with a quote from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, 1959, page 144, quote, "The state has the supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state, for the right of the world's spirit is above all special privileges." End quote. Author historian William Shire quoting George Hegel in his Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. In 1847, the London Communist League, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels used Hegel's theory of the dialectic to back up their economic theory of communism. Now, in the 21st century, Hegelian Marxist thinking affects our entire social and political structure. And this is worldwide. Okay, the Hegelian dialectic is the framework for guiding our thoughts and actions into conflicts that lead us to a predetermined solution. If we do not understand how the Hegelian dialectic shapes our perceptions of the world, then we do not know how we are helping to implement the vision. When we remain locked into dialectical thinking, we cannot see out of the box. And you can do yourself your own experiment throughout your own personal life. I mean, throughout your own workplace. Is there a dialectic principle being played out right in your workplace, or at home, or in these types of things? Okay. Hegel's dialectic is a tool which manipulates us into a frenzied circular pattern of thought and action. And as I just stated, how you can use this as an example in your own personal life, and you know, just really think about it, and then apply that to the world stage and what's going on. And it's the same thing, okay? Every time we fight for or defend against an ideology, we are playing a necessary role in Marx and Engels' grand design to advance humanity into a dictatorship of the proletariat. The synthetic Hegelian solution to all these conflicts can't be introduced unless we all take a side that will advance the agenda. Okay, we all have to pick a side. Whereas true Christianity, true born-again, Bible-believing, non-denominational Christianity is not supposed to be of this world. We're in the world, but we're not supposed to be of the world. We're supposed to be separate. This dialectic thinking is not suited for that purpose. So that's why the ultimate goal is to eradicate true Christianity. Okay, that is why there is a counterfeit Christianity out there. And I hate to say this, but the counterfeit Christianity is the broad way. True Christianity is the straight and narrow. You know, the straight and narrow gate, and few there be that find it. So, you know, all you gotta do is look at here in America. You know, virtually every denominational church is 501c3 yoked, government yoked, which means they have to abide by the rules of the state. Okay, and if they don't comply, then they get their status yanked, and they get their church basically wiped out, essentially, in a nutshell. The Marxist global agenda is moving along at breakneck speed. The only way to completely stop the privacy invasions, expanding domestic police powers, land grabs, insane wars against inanimate objects, and transient verbs, covert actions, and outright assaults on individual liberty is to step outside the dialectic. This releases us from the limitations of controlled and guided thought. When we understand what motivated Hegel, we can see his influence on all of our destinies. Hegelian conflicts steer very political arenas on the planet. Hegelian conflicts steer every political arena on the planet, from the United Nations to the major American political parties, all the way down to local school boards and community councils. Dialogues and consensus buildings are primary tools of the dialectic, and terror and intimidation are also acceptable formats for obtaining the goal. The ultimate third way agenda is world government. Once we get what's really going on, we can cut the strings and move our lives in original directions outside the confines of the dialectical madness. Focusing on Hegel's and Engels' ultimate agenda and avoiding getting caught up in their impenetrable theories of social evolution gives us the opportunity to think and act our way toward freedom, justice, and genuine liberty for all. Obviously, I think this article is written in a secular humanist point of view, where mankind can be can do this on its own. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there, but you can see what's going on here and the actual program of this way of thinking, how it's it's well written on how this is played out. Today, the dialectic is active in every political issue that encourages taking sides. So anything where you're involved in taking sides with one party over the other, 100% of the time, there is a dialectic principle attached to it. Every single time. And what does that mean? That means it's a controlled conflict. We can see it in environmentalists instigating conflicts against private property owners, and Democrats against Republicans, and Greens against libertarians, and communists against socialists, and neocons against traditional conservatives, and community activists against individuals, and pro-choice versus pro-life, and Christians against Muslims, and isolationists versus interventionists, and peace activists against war hawks. No matter what the issue, the invisible dialectic aims to control both the conflict and the resolution of differences, and leads everyone involved into a new cycle of conflicts. And we're definitely not in Kansas anymore. So let's go over some definitions of this dialectic. Merriam-Webster: the Hegelian process of change, in which a concept or its realization passes over into and is preserved and fulfilled by its opposite. Development through the stages of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis in accordance with the laws of dialectical materialism. Any systematic reasoning, exposition, or argument that juxtaposes opposed or contradictory ideas and usually seeks to resolve their conflict. The dialectical tension or opposition between two interacting forces or elements. Okay, dialectical materialism is the Marxist theory that maintains the material basis of a reality constantly changing and a dialectical process and a priority of matter over mind. In Wikipedia, it states, Hegel's dialectic often appears broken up for convenience into three moments called thesis, and the French historical example, the Revolution, the antithesis, the terror which followed, and the synthesis, the constitutional state of free citizens. Okay, so all of this was under a Hegelian principle. It was a controlled conflict. Much Hegel scholarship does not recognize the usefulness of this triadic classification for shedding light on Hegel's thought, although Hegel refers to the two elemental considerations. First, the idea of freedom as the absolute and final aim. Secondly, the means for realizing it, i.e. the subjective side of knowledge and will, with its life, movement, and activity, thesis and antithesis. He doesn't use synthesis, but instead speaks of the whole. We then recognize the state as the moral whole and the reality of freedom, and consequently as the objective unity of these two elements. So what you have to do, in regards to the French Revolution, is we have to create the revolution. We have to, in the midst of creating this revolution, we need a follow-up of the revolution, and then the synthesis of that follow-up, because people will be so eager for something better, and the synthesis would be the constitutional state of free citizens. But how did we have to go about getting there? We had to go about slaughter. We had to go about warfare. We had to go about violence and these types of things in order to get there. Okay? Where if we would just stick to the simple principles of the laws of God and the Ten Commandments, everybody in this world, we would have no such problems. We would have no problems at all. You would be able to walk outside in the most, outside, for example, the city of Detroit and the suburbs with no problem at all. You would be able to leave your keys unlocked, your doors open, and these types of things because you wouldn't have to worry about anybody stealing anything. Okay? So is this really the actual way of attaining freedom? Is through conflicts and wars? Created conflicts? Because this is what it is. Creating two separate conflicts to bring about a certain goal. Hegel used this system of dialectics to explain the whole of the history of philosophy, science, art, politics, and religion. But many modern critics point out that Hegel often seems to gloss over the realities of history in order to fit it into his dialectical mold. In the 20th century, Hegel's philosophy underwent a major renaissance. This was due partly to the rediscovery and re-evaluation of him as the philosophical progenitor of Marxism by philosophically oriented Marxists, partly through a resurgence of the historical perspective that Hegel brought to everything, and partly through increasing recognition of the importance of his dialectical method. The book that did the most to reintroduce Hegel into the Marxist canon was perhaps George Lukács' History and Class Consciousness. This sparked a renewed interest in Hegel's reflected in the work of Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, and Ernst Bloch. Beginning in the 1960s, Anglo-American Hegel scholarship has attempted to challenge the traditional interpretation of Hegel as offering a metaphysical system. See Popular Occultism, and there's a link you can click on here. I'll provide this article so you can read it for yourself. Now here's the formula of the Hegelian dialectic aspect. You have A, which is the thesis, versus B, the antithesis. So you have the point, and you have B, you create the counterpoint, which brings together the final conclusion, which is the synthesis. For example, if A, my idea of freedom conflicts with B, your idea of freedom, then C, neither of us can be free until everyone agrees to be a slave. Okay, so let's just say, for example, you have one person with an idea of freedom. Okay, and you have this other person with another idea of freedom. Then the formula will not work. But what you need is the ultimate goal of we want freedom. Well, in order to obtain the one person's view of freedom, which is the same as the other person's view of freedom, this is what has to happen in order to attain that goal. And that's basically the principles that we see materialized in today's world. The Soviet Union was based on the Hegelian dialectic, as is all Marxist writing. The Soviets didn't give up their Hegelian reasoning when they supposedly stopped being a communist country. They merely changed the dialectical language to fit into the modern version of Marxist thinking called communitarianism. American author Steve Montgomery explores Moscow's adept use of the Hegelian dialectic in Glasnost Perestroika, a model Potemkin village. Now, how is it possible to consider a Hegelian argument? If the ideas, interpretations of experience, and the sources are all wrong, can a conclusion based on all these wrong premises be sound? The answer is no. Two false premises do not make a sound conclusion, even if the argument follows the formula. 3, 4, 5, or 6 false premises do not all combine to make a conclusion sound. You must have at least one sound premise to reach a sound conclusion. Logical mathematical formulas are only the basis for deductive reasoning. Equally important is knowledge of semantics, or considering the meanings of the words used in the argument. Just because an argument fits the formula, it does not necessarily make the conclusion sound. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel knew this when he designed his dialectic. Hegel is an imperialist, con artist, who established the principles of dialectical no reason. Hegel's dialectic has allowed globalists to lead simple, capable, freedom men and women back into the superstitious, racist, and unreasonable age of imperial global dominance. National governments represent people who are free from imperial controls over private property, trade, and production. National governments protect their workers from imperial slavery by protecting the workers' market. But if you use Hegel's logical Marxism, the only way to protect people from slavery is to become the slave trader, just for a while. Twisted logic is why cons are so successful, and Hegel twisted it in such a way as to be impenetrable. Like Hegel and Marx, the best street con knows his spiel, has to use logic to bend and distort the story, and good cons weave their lies on logical mathematical progression. The fallacy is in the language, not in the math. Detective Philip Wart's 2001 article, Communist Oriental Policing, is a nice explanation of dialectical materialism's influence on America. Okay, so the communitarian purpose of the Hegelian dialectic. Hegel's theory is basically that mankind is merely a series of constant philosophical conflicts. Hegel was an idealist who believed that the highest state of mankind can only be attained through constant ideological conflict and resolution. The rules of the dialectic means mankind can only reach its highest spiritual consciousness through endless self-perpetuating struggle between ideals, and the eventual synthesizing of all opposites. Hegel's dialectic taught all conflicts takes man to the next spiritual level, but in the final analysis, the ideology simply justifies conflict and endless war. That's basically what it does. All these wars you see, Israel and Palestine, the Middle East, and all these types of things, it is all basically a justified conflict to bring about a final synthesis. That's all it is, folks. It's a stage. Even the Israel and Palestine thing, it's a stage. You have to understand that. You can't just look at it by what, Christian people are seeing in regarding to just the outward expression of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, or any other aspect. It is also the reasoning behind using military power to export an illogical version of freedom and false democratic ideals. The reason we can call it the justification of modern conflicts and war with impunity is because no one can prove Hegel's theory is true. No matter how many new words they make up to define it, or how many new theories they come up with to give it validity, we can prove beyond a doubt that it is all false, and we can show the final equation in Hegel's dialectic is A. Your nation goes here, system of political economy, list 1841. B. State-controlled world communism. C. State-controlled global communitarianism. The Hegelian dialectic is the ridiculous idea that constant conflict and continual merging of opposite ideologies, as established by extreme right or left belief systems, will lead spiritual mankind into final perfection. Americans understood man's spiritual quest to be outside the realm of government control. Hegel's brilliance rests in his ability to confuse and obfuscate the true motives of the planners, and millions of people worldwide have been trying to make sense of why it doesn't work for over 150 years. So if it hasn't worked in the past, it is not going to work in the future. Okay? And what does the Bible say? Sure, it might seem for a very brief moment, but it does say, "For when they shall say, Peace, peace, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as a woman in travail about to give birth." It's not going to last long. It's hardly going to last long. This has been tried out over and over and over and over again. And it has not worked before, and it will not work now. But like the double A definition of insanity, the world keeps trying it over and over, expecting different results. When Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx based their communist theory on Hegel's theory of spiritual advancement via constant resolution of differences, they based the theory of communism on an unproven theory. While Darwin's theory of evolution is still being debated, there's absolutely no proof that societies are continually evolving. When Engels and Marx later based their communist theory on Lewis Henry Morgan's theory of anthropology in 1877, they again based the theory of communism on an unproven theory. And when Amitai Etzioni used Hegelian reasoning to base the communitarian network on a balance between A, rights, and B, responsibilities, he built the entire theory of C, communitarianism, on nothing but disproven and unprovable unscientific theories. Already gaining substantial ground against the Americans, British Marxism was bolstered when Charles Darwin published his theory of human evolution in 1859. Engels, according to modern-day scholars, seized upon Darwin's theory to substantiate communism. When Marx read The Origin of Species, he wrote to Engels that although it is developed in the crude English style, this is the book which contains the basis and natural history for our view. They turned against what they saw as the social as opposed to the biological implications of Darwinism when they realized that it contained no support for the shibboleth of class oppression, since they were slippery customers rather than scientists. They were not likely to relinquish their views just because something did not fit. In 1877, Lewis Henry Morgan published Ancient Society or Researches in Life, Lines of Human Progress from Savagery through Barbarism to Civilization. Then the slippery Engels seized upon Morgan's work as the constantly evolving basis for the total unsubstantiated theory of natural social evolution into utopian world communism. Hegel's formula has been so successful that in 2003, all U.S. domestic and foreign policy is dominated by communitarian thinking. The whole country is living under the new laws, and yet Americans most affected by impenetrable Hegelian laws had never once heard the term used. And obviously that's true. I've only heard of this term in the past, 5-6 years. So what's the conclusion of the matter? Well, the Hegelian dialectic presupposes the factual basis for the theory of social evolutionary principles, which coincidentally backed up Marx's Darwinian theory of the social evolution of the species, even though it has been used for a century to create a vast new scientific community, including eugenics and socioeconomics. Does not adhere to the basis for all good scientific research, and appears to exist mainly to advance itself and all its sub-social scientific arms as a more moral human science. To the ACL, this means the entire basis for the communitarian solution is based on a false premise, because there is no factual basis that social evolution of the species exists, based as it is only on Darwinian and Marxist ideology of man's natural evolution towards a British version of utopia. The London Marxist platform in 1847 was to abolish private property. The American Revolution was based in private property rights. Marxist societies confiscate wealth and promise to redistribute it equally. America promised everyone they could keep and control what was the product of their own labor. Modern Marxist adherents openly claim they will rebuild the world, and they train activists, change agents, to openly support overthrowing the legitimate governments of the world. Okay? openly support overthrowing the legitimate governments of the world. Since their inception, Marxist agent provocateurs can be linked in every anarchist assassination and student uprising that caused chaos to the established European civilization throughout the 18th and 19th century. Modern Americans have succumbed to the conspiracy theory label and will only listen to what the propaganda machines tell them. Now our people don't believe anyone other than maybe the Arab world hates our freedom. Most modern Americans will never know what went wrong with their great experiment in democracy. While the Marxist communitarian argument has not provided a shred of evidence to prove their utopian vision, and their synthesis does not match their own projected conclusion of world justice, we are convinced their argument does in fact substantiate our conclusion, that the entire philosophical dialectical argument is nothing but a brilliant ruse. We used to call it a cheap parlor trick, until a responder to this page wondered how we could call it cheap when it's been so successful, and he was right. The dialectical arguments for human rights, social equity, and world peace and justice are a perfectly designed diversion in the defeated British Empire's Hegelian, Fabian, metaphysical, theosophical monopoly game. It's the most successful con job in the history of the modern world. For a well-presented Christian overview of the con, see American Babylon, Part 5, The Trumpet of the Merchants by Peter Goodgame. The communitarian synthesis is the final silent move, and a well-designed, quietly implemented plot to remake the world into colonies. To us, it doesn't matter if there is some form of ancient religion that propels the plotters, nor does it really matter if it turns out they're aliens, as some suggest. The bottom line is Hegelian dialectic sets up the scene for state intervention, confiscation, and redistribution in the U.S. and also in the world, and this is against our entire constitutional-based society. The Hegelian dialectic is not a conspiracy theory because the conspiracy theory is a fraud. We've all been duped by global elitists who plan to take totalitarian control of all nations, people, property, and produce. Communitarian plans exist in every corner of the world, and nobody at the local level will explain why there's no national legal avenue to withdraw from the UN's community development plans. Now, that's just basically how this whole thing works with this whole controlled chaos and everything like that. Again, everything that is being planned out is planned out on false premises and false theories that have not been proven and cannot be proven in order to bring out a world government that is not going to succeed. Okay, and obviously we know how that ends up. Now, how does it work? Well, let's basically take a look. This is what is really the whole endgame of everything, and regarding the prince and power of the air, the dragon, which gives the beast its authority. This is the whole principle here. This is basically simply defined. So let's look at the religious world of AD 325. Okay. First of all, you have Satan at the helm. He's the dragon, which gives the beast its power and great authority. And you have Constantine and Rome. The thesis and antithesis, the thesis being Athanasius and Arius. Okay. The conflict of theology was Trinitarianism, which is the thesis, and Unitarianism. Which culminates in the conflict of human reasoning, culminating in the First Nicaea Council, which is the prophet, and the synthesis, which is the recognition of carnal reasoning against Christian faith, and its institutionalization under state patronage and control. eventual outlawing of Christian faith, and the persecution of true saints by the false church until today. True Christianity is accounted heresy and ridiculed by most Bible students. That is the ultimate goal of Satan when creating these two principles, is to create such confusion that even most Bible students and most seminaries will, even though unknowingly, but they will basically agree that true Christianity, true Bible-based Christianity, is accounted as heresy. That's why it says in scripture such as Matthew 24, although a lot of it had a literal fulfillment, there is also a lot of it that is a dual fulfillment, that brothers will betray sisters, sons will betray mothers, and these types of things. Brother will betray brother. The love of many will wax cold. And this is basically the end game of the synthesis of the times we are heading into. Okay, so let's take a look at the religious world of Papal Rome. Again, you have Satan at the top of this all. Alright? And then the ones under Satan is obviously the quote-unquote the globalist elite, and the thesis and antithesis, Roman Catholicism, Protestantism. Here's the conflict of theology. The antithesis was the Reformation, the thesis was the Counter-Reformation. The thesis was the Great Harlot, which is still in effect today. And the conflict of theology is prostitute daughters. Denominations. Vatican II, thesis, antithesis, World Council of Churches. The end of Gentile dispensation, beast unites with image to the beast. Incarnation of Pope, apostasy. The prophet synthesis is union of churches to stop communism and rule new world order under a religio-political system. And then finally, in this last section here, in his novel, Coningsby, Disraeli wrote, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." Woodrow Wilson said, quote, "Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." End quote. Now for our text in Matthew 16:6, Jesus said, "Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees." This is another illustration of Hegelian dialectics, or logical arguments. In other words, the mark of the beast. Wisdom against faith. Here were two denominations, each inspired by Satan, whose purpose was to contest the laws and ordinances of the Old Testament. One was a thesis, the other its antithesis. Neither could agree on the word or recognize it manifested before them. The synthesis through the apostasy of both parties was their own damnation through rejection and crucifixion of Messiah. Even their high priest declared, "His blood be upon us and upon our people," and it has been ever since. The synthesis sought by the establishment is called the New World Order. Without controlled conflict, this New World Order will not come about. Random individual actions of persons in society will not lead to this synthesis. It is artificial. Therefore, it has to be created. And this is being done with the calculated, managed use of conflict. And all the while, this synthesis is being sought. There is no profit in playing the involved parties against one another. Hence, World War I was postponed three times, until the pawns were in their predetermined places. This also explains why the international bankers backed the Nazis, the Soviet Union, North Korea, North Vietnam, etc., except against the United States. The conflict built profits while pushing the world ever closer to one world government. The establishment is ruled by elite secret societies, which is ultimately ruled by the Vatican, which is ultimately ruled by Satan. Their operations must be seen and explained in terms of the Hegelian dialectic process. Their operations cannot be explained in terms of any other philosophy. Therefore, they cannot be described as right or left, Marxist or capitalist. However, one group is secular and another is religious. The religious force is the Roman Catholic Church. We are all familiar with their place in history and in prophecy. Our teaching will consider the secular group and its objective, which is all of these and none of these. So again, and here you have the papacy, which is basically, they're basically controlling both aspects of it. The religious sphere of things and the political sphere of things. I mean, this is basically what's going down. Let's take a look at the whole World War scenario. The whole letter with Albert Pike. Let's see how this is panning out. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. This was the synthesis. The divergence caused by the agents or agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires, that's thesis and antithesis, will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, here's the synthesis right here. Communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. Okay. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war, so basically both these groups were created. Both these groups were created entities, the Zionism and fascism. And they had to pin these two against one another. So basically this was the created conflict. The thesis and the antithesis. Fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed, and that the political Zionism, which Nazism would fall under the fascists, and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. It was controlled conflict, controlled chaos. The Holocaust and everything was controlled with one group funding both sides of this to ultimately bring about a Zionist, a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. Now, is this how God wanted to gather his quote-unquote chosen people to Israel under some Luciferian ideology? Under some lie? Under some secret principle? Under some dialectic, confused, controlled chaos? Folks, God is not the author of confusion. So what happened during the Second World War? International communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. And what do we have now? Jump down to the Third World War. Which must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. And the political the political Zionists, which would include Christian Zionists, all of these mainstream Christian denominations that are like rah-rah Israel and these types of things. Folks, this was what was brought into play to deceive you. This is what the Second World War was all about, is to create this restraining aspect, basically to keep you in check, to basically just kind of balance Christendom out, to get them in a deceptive phase in order to use that to create the final cataclysm. And this is what is going on now today between, Christianity and Islam, mainstream Christianity and Islam, and these types of things, both under a controlled conflict under the papacy, which is ultimately controlled by the dragon. Okay, all you gotta do is look at the symbols. Why is it that you see so many Masonic symbols in Israel and these types of things? Why is it that Rothschild owns 80% of that land? Which ultimately is owned by Rome, basically. So the war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Okay, this is what's going on right now. So is the Third World War happening right now before our very eyes? Yes, indeed it is. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue. Okay, we see a lot of division on this issue now, don't we? It's basically a way to get us away from the true biblical aspect of what Israel is and what Israel isn't. Because Satan doesn't want us to know what that is. We'll be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. Okay, so this Third World War is not just a physical war. This is a mindset war. This is a psychological war. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. This was the plan that was set out 100 years before these world wars, first two world wars, commenced, and now we are in the Third World War. We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist. And obviously atheism is at a peak, and nihilists are at a peak. And we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries. The world minority of revolutionaries. So who's the minority? The minority are those that belong to the straight and narrow way. The minority are those that belong to the ones that are called to be separate. For come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. That is what the minority is. The world minority of revolutionaries. That's basically the label that Albert Pike basically called us. We'll exterminate those destroyers of civilizations, which again includes us, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. Don't we see this happening now? This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Well, true Christianity is not going to be conquered and exterminated. Atheism is basically being destroyed right now at the helm by the Pope saying, hey, even atheists can get into heaven. Just all they have to do is do good works. So we see that spiritual aspect. We see that the mindset being played out. So, again, in conclusion, we can look at history. We can pick up truth from history. But we also have to keep in mind that throughout all of the events that has happened throughout history regarding wars and conflict was all to bring about a certain agenda, a certain final goal, a synthesis. And the thesis and the antithesis was never a good thing. It was never a good thing. It was never a good way to bring about certain issues. Because the thesis and antithesis ultimately always ended up war and fighting amongst each other and bloodshed. And this is what you have now. And it's all controlled by one party, and that one party basically branches out, controls both sides, and the one that's controlled by it is Satan, who ultimately controls the whole thing. But there is one greater than him that is in control, and that is God. That is Jesus Christ. He's in control. And Satan knows he's already defeated. This is why he has created such a very... It's a good plan. It's a smart plan. You know, he's not dumb. He's been working at this for 6,000 years. But he also knows he is defeated. And he was defeated at that cross. And so therefore, Jesus Christ is ultimately in control. And we have nothing to fear. But I wanted to bring this out to your attention to show you that everywhere you see conflict, everywhere, including Israel and Palestine, always remember, and just look what happened recently with the Pope going to Israel. I mean, you can see it being played out right before your eyes, but no one seemed to catch it. All they could think about is, oh, we need to support Israel and be against the Pope and these types of things. Where, the papacy, the Vatican, is in control of what's going on both sides of things regarding Palestine and Israel. It's all together to bring about a synthesis. But yet, so many people want to stay caught up in certain ideologies, and in turn are leading themselves into their own deception. And again, the number one thing in the end times that Jesus warned us about is take heed that no man deceive you. Deception is the name of the game. Deception is going to be the ultimate aim that brings about persecution. And we have to be willing to accept the fact that we can be deceived. Because if it were possible, even the very elect would be deceived. So don't think that you're above and beyond the deception at play and the deception at work. I want to thank you for listening. Truth be told, truth be known. Stay safe. God bless. See you next time. Bye-bye.